Soundside brings you beyond the headlines with news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Libby Dankman. Every week I sit down with local journalists for Soundside's Front Page, where we give you a shortcut to understanding the latest news and cultural moments and how they affect us here in the Puget Sound region. It's all here on Soundside, on the radio or streaming Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW, on the KUOW app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
How do you tell stories about the economy people actually want to listen to?
Well, we happen to know some experts who are great at that.
This is Planet Money from NPR.
Planet Money has been making economic news fun since 2008. That's no easy feat. And now it's the start of a new chapter for the beloved podcast, a whole book's worth of chapters.
Their new book is called Planet Money, a guide to the economic forces that shape your life. So we're bringing you a special episode of Booming with our friends at Planet Money. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
And I'm Joshua McNichols. Today on this booming Planet Money mashup, the hidden laws that control our economy and how they're affecting us here in Seattle. That's coming up.
How we doing? Any audience?
Found it. 4 listens so far.
In only an hour. At this rate, we're going to be like at 2 million by Thursday.
Kenny, Alex, thank you for being here on Booming. We're so excited to have you. Can you just tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. My name is Kenny Malone. I'm one of the hosts of Planet Money, and my cousin Chris lives in Seattle. What's up, Chris? Shout out, Chris.
And I am Alex Massey, the author of the Planet Money book. I contribute to Planet Money. I'm a business reporter and sometimes food writer.
Anything you want to say to Chris? My cousin? No?
Oh.
You don't want to say hi to Chris? Rude?
I hope he's having a great day.
So Planet Money really created this new genre of economic reporting, and it showed a lot of people that they should care about economic stories who may not have otherwise. I'm just curious, when you started with the show, what were your expectations, and did they align with reality?
Well, I think I am one of those people who thought they didn't care about economics and then listened to Planet Money and then cared about economics. So I'm very much the product of that because the show started like right around the financial collapse. So 2008, 2009? I was just out of undergrad then, and I was super into public radio. And that show in particular, Planet Money in particular, did show me a way to think about the world that was methodical and distant, but yet really personal. And that fine line that I think that original team was walking, where you have the kind of dismal science-y sort of remove, but then also zoom in from time to time and just talk to the people who are experiencing it, that has stayed in the DNA of the show through so many iterations. I think the show's changed a million ways, but I think that is the one thing that still remains there. Whenever we're looking to do a story, we are thinking about like, how does this become personal? How do we make this tangible? And how do we make this something that regular people want to listen to? I don't think that's changed. I think that reality was absolutely in place when I started there.
We call that the 3-foot zone at Booming. How do we make sure the story is within the 3-foot zone?
Yeah.
That's fun, yes. I just learned about it, the 3-foot rule at the retail store, where it's like you have 3 seconds and 3 feet to get someone to buy something on a retail shelf. That's for a different series we're working on. But
Joshua did an episode about
board
that,
games.
actually.
Shout out board games.
Okay.
Yeah,
Does it apply to books, Kenny? Does the 3-foot rule apply to books?
It applies to board games. We must assume it must apply to books.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good. We're up to speed.
And do you think that in that time, since you started, the types of economic stories that listeners are interested in has changed?
Ooh.
I'm curious what Alex thinks about that, because Alex has kind of come in and out of the Planet Money orbit. Just so listeners may understand, Alex has been in our orbit, I think since before I was even at the show, kind of like in the world of journalism, adjacent to economics, adjacent to business, writing some stories that I remember we were very jealous of over at Priceonomics.
Yes.
And so he would like contribute stories to Planet Money. And then when we needed a book written, we were like, none of us really know how to write a book, I don't think. And luckily Alex did. So I'm curious, you've been kind of in and out of the orbit more than me. So what would your answer to that be?
Yeah, I mean, I think I also have perspective on this because I am probably the world's foremost authority on the archives of the Planet Money podcast.
That's
since
true
there were
point.
times where I was like, oh, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. It was this like huge unfair advantage I had that, this book is full of original reporting, but there were times where, we have 15 plus years of Planet Money hosts, producers, editors creating the show. There was all sorts of reporting I could draw on to come, look for great ideas, great ways to explain complicated ideas. And, that meant I was doing a lot of listening to episodes from, 2012, let's say. And I think it is remarkable how similar they sound to Planet Money episodes today. I mean, if you go really far back, there were some kind of like segmenty things Planet Money was doing in the very earliest days that have disappeared. One of them became The Indicator, the daily show from Planet Money that now exists, shorter daily news show. There was the Planet Money used to always kind of do like their indicator of the day before getting into the episode at one point. But yeah, I mean, I think this kind of, explaining economics and explaining the economy often through storytelling, finding people who are experiencing the big headlines or economic forces has, as Kenny said, has been in the DNA for a long time. And I don't think, I don't see huge, some things have evolved over time, but I don't think there's kind of been huge currents that have changed the Planet Money approach or what sort of stories the audience.
My feeling is, and Monica and Joshua, I'm curious if you've experienced this too, is that audiences have become more tolerant of like deeper in the weeds kind of stuff than I think the show originally gave them credit for. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why that might be the case, but I do find that people seem to have an appetite for that. I mean, have you experienced that with your show as well?
Yeah, we get that with Booming. We've, polled listeners to see what they think about the length and the depth. And some of them say, it's perfect, but we definitely get people who say, I feel like you're just getting started,
I think there's more.
We're here for 4 hours. You have the 4-hour listeners. Keep talking.
Yeah.
I think that there's more curiosity, and it feels very close to home right now because there are so many question marks in the economy. There's so much uncertainty that people crave deeper explanations for things that seem confounding, which is, something we're going to talk about here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that does change, right, is that there are times where there have been years or periods where economics is not dominating headlines very often. Mm-hmm. And I think then we are often kind of trying to go find ways to draw people in to, the way economics is affecting our lives, and then there are times where the Trump administration announces tariffs on every country in the world. And everyone wants to know, what is a tariff? How do they work? Like we kind of alternate through periods, and we're in one of those periods right now, right? Where like economics is kind of like batting people in the face every day. And so there is some like immediate like, oh, I would like this explained. But then I also think something that's fun about Planet Money, and a reason that like I want to write this book, I love working with the team, is, doing those stories that like no one in particular asked for, but they are like delightful ways to understand the world around us. And those are always like some of my favorite shows and episodes.
Yeah.
That should be our tagline. Planet Money, the book you didn't ask for, but you'll like it. You'll like it.
I imagine some listeners over the air were asking, where is the Planet Money book? I think I've been told that's a thing, but yeah.
Okay. One of the things that comes up in your book, and also just in Planet Money stories in general, are these sort of hidden laws of our economic system that drive what's happening. And one of my favorite moments in any Planet Money story is where you say, that thing that she was noticing, there's actually a word for that, and we talked to the person who invented it.
We figured out our secret.
I mean, it helps, naming these things in a way sort of helps us wrap our minds around something that otherwise might feel unexplainable.
I think that's exactly it. It's like a pathologizing of the thing, and it's it may, whatever phenomenon we're going to talk about here, and we perhaps we should discuss some of these laws and principles or whatever that move the world. But I do personally find it sort of relaxing to name the thing and understand what I'm working with, and it just gives me some order to what feels like chaos. And I do like that. Do some come to mind? It's funny that we do that so often. You're totally right.
Yeah. One that comes to mind for me is Jevon's paradox.
Classic.
I recognize how it comes up in covering transportation, because there's this counterintuitive thing that happens when you try to reduce traffic by adding lanes to a freeway. It may cut down on traffic congestion briefly, but then that traffic always comes roaring back. People just fill up those lanes. I wonder if you could talk about how Jevons paradox works and what we can learn from it.
Yeah, I think, and it's a good example too of how sometimes something that I find really fun and satisfying about economics is the times you learn one idea, law, theory, what have you, and then it explains a lot of different phenomenon. And that happens here, right? So this is an idea going back to, Britain.
It says here in the Planet Money book, the 1860s.
The 1860s. So very much like the Industrial Revolution is in full swing in Great Britain. And the English economy is really driven by coal. And there is this concern, like, what if we run out of coal? And so politicians are thinking very seriously about, like, well, are there ways we could conserve coal? Could we create ways that basically, like, different machines would be more efficient and would need less coal? Everything that we could do to get more use out of coal, like the same amount of coal. And then, the idea of Jevons paradox is that could actually backfire. Because if you make machines more efficient, so they need less coal, if you do things to produce coal more efficiently, that will all either increase the supply of coal or make it cheaper. So then there will be more uses for coal. More people will want to use coal to do more things. So actually you're kind of like increasing the demand from it. And right, so we see that similarly, like you said, with freeways. You think, okay, I'm going to expand the freeways to reduce congestion, but now you've kind of reduced the cost, not the like monetary cost, but the time cost of using a freeway. So more people are like, oh, okay, then I'm fine with living farther away from my job because I'll be able to drive there faster. And then you just end up kind of at the same equilibrium amount of traffic potentially. And so, yeah, and this is something people have talked a lot about with AI and other examples of automation, where a really famous example of this with bank tellers, where like in the 70s and 80s, you start getting ATMs installed in banks. They're automated teller machines. It's in the name. They're trying to automate the work of a bank teller. And yet the number of bank tellers employed in American banks continued to rise, not dramatically, but still kept going up rather than down for several more decades. And that's because when you made it a lot cheaper to provide banking services by automating some of the things that bank tellers did, it was cheaper to open a bank branch. So banks opened more bank branches and therefore needed about the same or a bit more bank tellers. So that's Jevons paradox, and this like kind of counterintuitive way it can operate.
I just have a somewhat terrible memory, and so I always forget the name of this paradox. And I've come to think of it as the hungry, hungry hippo paradox, where it's just like it doesn't matter. We just keep eating the resource no matter what at greater and greater amounts. Sometimes I think of it as the give a mouse a cookie paradox, also. Mm-hmm. But yes, Jevon, that's right.
Yeah, and you could also tell that you're the podcasters, whereas I'm the writer, because you said the name, and I was like, I've written that a million times and I don't know how to say that. Jevon. I've just been saying whatever I want in my head.
I was gonna go with Joshua said it first, and I was like, I'm not gonna contradict Joshua.
But yeah, so it's
his show.
It's absolutely one of those cases of unintended consequences. And the other lesson of it is that we should really let Kenny name more of these. Every economist who's about to coin something should come to Kenny.
You should
it should be called the hungry hippo paradox.
That's not a bad
of
idea.
Economics rather than Jevons paradox.
Perhaps
is more memorable.
My consulting service can be. I can help you name stuff. Yeah, it's a good idea.
This Planet Money signature where you diagnose the pathology in the economy and give it a name and help, explain something that people are experiencing in their everyday lives. I thought it worked really effectively in the chapter on childcare. That might also just be because that's my favorite topic. I've got 2 kids in childcare. I can't shut up about it. But
I'm here with you. I have this feeling.
Yeah, I mean, we a lot of us wonder why the free market has not solved this problem, right? There's plenty of demand, but the supply doesn't seem to be responding. As a customer, you feel like you're overpaying, and yet the workers are being underpaid. Can you just talk a little bit about the sort of law that is creating this phenomenon and why there's only really one way out of it?
Yeah, so this is another one of those powerful laws that you learn it and then you can see it at work in many different parts of the economy. And it's called Baumol's cost disease, named after the economist William Baumol. Again, maybe Kenny would come up with a more catchy term for it.
Oh yeah, think on that.
Yeah, but and so his kind of the origin story of the idea of cost disease is that during the JFK administration, they asked this economist, William Baumol, like, hey, a lot of like artists and theaters are struggling. Like, could you look into this? Like, why are they all struggling financially? Like, why are there so many starving artists? And so him and a colleague are like poking around backstage. They're interviewing people in theaters, and they come up with this really elegant theory. And the idea is that, like, if we overgeneralize a little bit, there are kind of two parts of the economy. One part of the economy produces things made by factories, maybe like making, shirts or electronics. But basically, part A of the economy is everything that really has like productivity and efficiency gains over time. Whereas like something like 70% of the American workforce used to be farmers. Now it's obviously way, way, way lower than that. And yet we have more food than we did back then, right?
You can grow a lot more food with fewer people.
Yeah, incredible productivity gains in part A of the economy. Part B of the economy is things that are very labor intensive, and they look fairly similar to the way they did 100 years ago or even before the Industrial Revolution, right? So childcare is one of those. You still need, one human for a number of toddlers that's not that high. Haircuts, you still need, you can't, like, people aren't doing 5 beard trims now in the same amount of time it took to do 1 beard trim 50 years ago. Restaurants. And so what we see is that, for kind of like manufacturing TVs, right? Like a big screen TV used to be something people like rich jerks bragged about. But now like big screen TVs are like so affordable that like it's not, you look like a chump if you tried to brag about it. And as a result of kind of these productivity gains, innovation, there's often like upward pressure on salaries in kind of part A of the economy. They're competing for workers who can help them innovate, compete, enjoy the fruits of these productivity gains, efficiency gains. But like in part B of the economy, this is like very labor intensive. They're still feeling that upward pressure on salaries. So to compete with part A of the economy, they do have to like up their salaries. And so as a result, their, Broadway theater tickets, haircuts, these labor-intensive services, childcare, the cost goes up. So this is one of these kind of trade-offs that it's like the cost of a successful economy. Like the entire economy is growing, people are getting wealthier, but some things, including things we really care about, like childcare, that are really important, they get more expensive over time. Like that is cost disease.
So when we learn about cost disease, or when we learn about Jevons paradox, I mean, it's rewarding to understand how things work. But, thinking about our broader audience, what can they take from knowing these things? How can they apply them to their regular lives? What do we do with this information?
Well, do you want us to fix the cost disease? Is what you're asking?
If you could, yeah. I mean, before my kids enter public school would be really helpful.
Yeah, it would be useful. I mean, listen, like, I think this is the catch-22 of reporting on economics, is a lot of these forces are nearly gravitational. So understanding them simply helps you understand where you stand on the planet and why the things are moving around you. And if you try to change gravity, that may be a flawed endeavor. But some of these things are also cautionary tales. When you see political officials like talking about something that like if we add more capacity to this freeway, like it's probably going to result historically in something that looks a bit like Jevons paradox. And so I think these can make people more informed citizens, especially because a lot of these symptoms will begin at a policy level. So you can be a smarter citizen in your city. But I do think some of it is just understanding the world to understand the world a bit. And perhaps you find solace in that, perhaps you don't. I think there's a whole spectrum of these kinds of pathologies too. Like there are some very personal ones that have developed in the last 20, 30 years under the banner of behavioral economics. And I find those much more useful because those are about the sort of predictably irrational ways that we make decisions that economic models historically may not have predicted. And those I just find like useful heuristics to think through things. And those would be things like, the way that we overvalue something once we actually possess it, the way that we may overvalue a sale. There's just like this checklist of all of these ways that people tend to be a little irrational all in the same way. And I find that those just help me on a day-to-day basis make better decisions. It doesn't fix the cost disease, I will say. And it may not make me feel that much better about that.
Yeah. I mean, the personal examples help us kind of understand what purchases we might make in our lives or how we might value something differently. And then some of the more abstract ones can have direct implications in terms of policy and what, how we vote, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think
for sure.
with cost disease, right, that's one where Cost Disease makes a really strong argument for the necessity of like the government subsidizing childcare, either like publicly providing it for free or subsidizing it. And that certainly is was part of Baumol's writings about Cost Disease, was this idea that bummer, if your economy grows and you get richer, you make certain things, some of them very important, more expensive. But he did the math and said all that wealth provided by the growth of part A of the economy can subsidize things like, elementary schools, childcare, policing, things where you don't get as many productivity gains and they are very labor intensive.
Yeah, I think the inevitability of it is a helpful way to think about it. That I think you say something in the book this is the cost of having a healthy and growing economy is these services will become more expensive.
Economics does have these almost laws that can feel like gravitational forces, or trying to row against them is like trying to go against the current. But they are not truly iron laws, we are the economy. It's made up of humans. Governments and other institutions create the rules of the game, right? So absolutely, Cost Disease is just a trade-off you have to face. But also, you could take the wealth created by the growth of the economy to make the things that are afflicted by Cost Disease more affordable. Or people have often pointed to Cost Disease as part of the reason that college in particular is so expensive, right? You still have one professor, doing a seminar with 12 students or a lecture with 80 students. But I don't think anyone thinks there's no way that college could get more efficient or more productive. That is more a problem of incentives, where a lot of colleges are more incentivized to be as prestigious as possible rather than educating as many students as well as possible at the lowest possible price point. So, some of these, they are kind of gravitational in their force, but they're not truly inevitable in the way that laws of physics are.
Soundside brings you beyond the headlines with news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Libby Dankman. Every week I sit down with local journalists for Soundside's Front Page, where we give you a shortcut to understanding the latest news and cultural moments and how they affect us here in the Puget Sound region. It's all here on Soundside, on the radio or streaming Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW, on the KUOW app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
One of my favorite stories in the book, as someone who reports on housing, is about the Squamish Nation, an indigenous tribe in Vancouver, BC. And, it's a favorite story for me because it tells us something about how to think about housing supply and demand, which affects housing prices. I know you just did an episode on this. It was wonderful. I recommend it to anybody. And it's a chapter in your book. Can you tell our listeners, in just a few sentences, what the Squamish did in downtown Vancouver, BC?
Yeah, so as the result of a court case, the Squamish Nation reclaimed a piece of land, quite small, just 10.5 acres, but both meaningfully to them historically and culturally, because they had a village there that had been destroyed as the city of Vancouver expanded, but also was an incredibly valuable piece of real estate, 10 acres right by downtown Vancouver. And then what makes it particularly interesting is that since this was reserve land, since it's the land of the Squamish Nation, none of Vancouver's zoning laws applied there. And so they ended up building a huge residential development, 11 towers, 6,000 rental apartments. The tallest of the towers is about 58 stories. And so you can really see in visually striking terms the kind of development and expansion of the housing supply that has been restrained by Vancouver's zoning laws, because there was this one tiny piece of land where they did not apply. And as a result, you got these huge towers sprouting up.
Yeah. I mean, this story has my head spinning in two different ways. One is it got me thinking about tribes in our area and land that they own. The Puyallup owns some land just north of the city of Tacoma, and they're looking at how should we develop that land. And
right.
I want to ask them what they think about this story, And then number two, this idea of having a natural experiment where the traditional zoning rules don't apply. And when they are kind of released, it shows how strongly the pent-up demand for housing has been, because if you think about the demand as like this bar graph, and suddenly, these towers represent the demand, there is demand for that much housing in this place. That's
the
been
living
held
bar
back.
graph. Yes, yes, that's true.
Yeah, because there is a way that like what prices are doing is they're like a signal and an incentive to quote several economists, right? And so normally like we are frustrated by high rents. But when a market is functioning well, that high price should be a signal to people saying like, hey, people need places to live. They're willing to pay for it. There's demand. And you will be rewarded if you can go build more housing and fulfill that demand and get the thing that people need.
Yeah. What do you think the lesson is for us here in Seattle? I mean, we've been, as a state, toying with relaxing the rules on zoning to let more kinds of, missing middle housing in the city. Yeah. But what lessons should we draw from the Squamish story?
Yeah, I think there are a few. I mean, I think one is they're a kind of beautiful illustration of how you can build for the future while honoring the past. Because I think, they did have plans for similar developments that they didn't go forward with. And I think one of the reasons is that some of them didn't really feel Squamish. And so the buildings going up, they have this big metalwork that is like a symbol called a trigon that's found in Squamish artwork. There's artwork that's going to be throughout the development. So there are ways where it felt like, this was an important piece of land and building something super modern, but it also felt Squamish. And I think that's one of those things that like, we need to build, people need places to live, but I understand the desire to preserve, the places we love and what's special about them. So finding a way to do both is pretty special. I also think the way that there was this like unity of purpose that the Squamish talked about, we need to build for 7 generations. This project, we have an opportunity to generate revenue that can benefit the entire nation, secure our economic future. And the fact that therefore they were able to they were liberated from zoning laws, but then they actually held a vote themselves to approve this project and the type of zoning to build that big and that dense. So they need to convince their leadership need to convince their own people on using, a very important historically piece of land this way. And I think there was this understanding that actually like, if we build this big project, we'll generate enough wealth that it will benefit everyone. And I think with lots of developments in other cities, if neighbors do give up the ability to veto, water down, and delay every single project, that makes projects a lot less expensive and therefore the housing less expensive, but also means there are more profits to each project that could be used to fund infrastructure for the neighborhood or otherwise benefit the neighbors. So it doesn't just feel like this is just more traffic or other downsides. There are upsides here where we'll all benefit. And I think that's another big lesson from the Squamish Nation.
In your experience, Monica and Joshua, how receptive has the region been to increased residential density?
There's been a fundamental shift. For years, the mayors and local city councils responded to their constituents, who included homeowners, and said, we need to protect the voices in the properties of people who are concerned they're going to lose their value because a big apartment goes up next door. But there's been so much demand that at the state, leaders have gone over the heads of city councils and mayors and said, we recognize that, you'd like to support these denser housing policies, but you can't do it because you're having to answer to these well-moneyed and vocal constituents. And so the state was able to sort of stake out this ground and say, we'll basically provide some cover for you and do this statewide in large cities. And it's sort of changed the ground rules here.
Which is not to say that there isn't still, opposition from single-family homeowners. I have a neighbor who's quite unhappy about the rezoning of our neighborhood. But yeah, it does seem like from an institutional perspective, there's a recognition that can't be the loudest voice anymore.
Yeah, and not to say one side is right or one side is wrong, but the power has shifted. Absolutely.
Right. Well, I mean, you asked earlier about sort of how we view policies and paradoxes, whatever the plural of paradox is, these rules. And I think Alex mentioned that really all of these conversations end up when they are had in good faith. I think they really are about trade-offs and like what trade-offs are people willing to make, because very rarely is there a correct answer to these giant problems. But I find that by reporting on economics, I'm curious if this is your experience too, I simply understand the trade-offs much better. And then that boils down to your own personal, your morals, your ethics, what you believe should be right or not right. But so often the conversation just takes place at this removed sort of ideological space where we're not really on the ground having conversation about, if we do this, this will likely happen. If we do this, this will likely happen. This trade-offs conversation, I find it very useful and probably the most important thing I've taken away. I'm curious if you all have found that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the longer I cover economics, the more convinced I become that nothing is simple, that there are always people who will benefit and lose. There are always trade-offs to every story, and that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like
true.
Trade-offs are one of those things that if you like sit with it longer, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, because you're like, sure, yeah, there are trade-offs, but then I think you see it recurring everywhere, and it's just so big, right? That way that like there are people debating self-driving cars right now and they're worried about the job losses, but like if you block everything that causes job losses, then you don't get economic growth. And economic growth matters almost more than anything else in the world for improving living standards, for, improving human health, longevity, happiness. And so it's just like, it is one of those things that doesn't sound the most, you learn the first time, you're like, okay, sure, neat. But then just like, it's everywhere and they're there, it's like this paradox that the longer you sit with, it sounds a little simple, but the more profound it becomes, the more you think of all the different implications and areas where it applies and how big they are and how much it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, I'm glad that you brought up self-driving cars and job loss, because I think we've been dancing around artificial intelligence a little, and I think we should just get into it.
Have we
now.
all been trying not to say it?
Yeah,
Do we all agree?
I know. How
I
long
thought
have
we weren't gonna.
Well, I've been
it?
listening to like your episode because you're in one of those cities that's on the frontier a little bit, and so hearing your reporting about speaking with people in the tech sector and how it's affected their job is something I've been paying attention to.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle is the epicenter of the tech layoffs. We have had the most of any major city, and this is something that I cover, that I've been covering. It's such a big story. There are 20 things a day that I could be covering. And I know Planet Money started during the Great Recession. You have also lived through many big economic stories. I'm just curious how you think about listener fatigue and which stories to tell so that your listeners get the information that they need without being overwhelmed.
Monica, I feel like that is the question that I wake up with most days, where it's like, all right, what does the audience want to know about artificial intelligence and the growth in this sector? What do they need to know about it? And what do we even know about it? I feel like those three prongs are often the wobbliest stool that I could imagine, because we don't know much. We skeptics think that a lot of claims are overblown and publicity, or perhaps coverage for layoffs that people wanted to do anyway. But the reality is, it is clearly a very useful technology, and there are historical precedents that we can point to and try to understand. And I think your show has done an incredible job looking at some of those historic precedents. And
thank you.
I just think we don't know. Like we simply don't know, and the research is being done while the changes are happening. And at the end of the day, I do wonder if what listeners really want to know is like, how much do I need to know about this? Can you just tell me what I need to know, please? Am I going to lose my job because of this? Like, that's a very serious, important question. Am I missing out on investment opportunities because of this? And some of it boils down to that. How scared should I be? And how scared of missing out should I be? And those are probably the two hardest questions to answer on a national scale. But I think what your show has done very wisely is like taking it sector by sector. Like, how scared should video game programmers be? How scared should, like, you know what I mean? And I think it's a very wise way to approach this, because you can have these in-depth conversations that ultimately don't have an answer. Like, no one knows how scared anyone should be. But yeah, we don't know. We don't know how to do it. We did an episode, like, I don't know, 3 years ago, where we used some of these very early tools to like make an episode of Planet Money. And it is so outdated, so fast. It's wild. And I personally find it terrifying to spend time in the AI space. So I do try to avoid it and let other colleagues tackle a lot of the big AI stories. But the reality is, I don't know. Alex, you did a dive for the book that you've already kind of talked about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think speaking generally about like if you're worried about listener fatigue with things in the headlines, one approach that has served Planet Money really well is we are often looking for a way to talk about something that's dominating headlines. But as we do it, really add value, maybe by going and finding the person really experiencing it so you can see a human wrestle with it. Another thing we often do is try to explain, an economic principle or idea that's very relevant to the headlines, but that also will continue to be relevant and useful for understanding the economy a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And I think that's something that like helped this book too, that there's like ideas that, stories from years ago that like the lessons, the insights are still just as relevant, and like new news events, you're like, oh yes, I see this at work again.
How are you all thinking about it? I mean, I think you've done more AI coverage than we have done. And it's really good. Like you've looked at if it is an AI bubble, what have we learned from bubbles in the past? You've looked at specific job sectors. You've looked at what kind of technology should we think of this as? Is this electricity? Is it something else? I mean, I think you've found very smart angles. Have you found fatigue in your listeners are listening to this, I guess. Are you fatigued, listeners? Are you tired of this?
They haven't told us that they're tired of us. They might be tired of AI.
They fell asleep of it. Yeah. No.
But I think it's kind of what Alex was saying, where it's like you can either take the extremely close view, you can be with one person who's dealing with this right now, or you can take the long view and you can look at like, how does this fit into history or economic theory, or, it's sort of a way of helping listeners to feel that they understand what they need to know more than the like nitty gritty of, okay, all the AI stocks are up and the software stocks are down today. And like, it makes my head hurt to, check in every morning. It makes my head hurt, and that's my job.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it occurs to me there's like, it is a business also. And that's not really how we would cover things from a financial markets perspective. But these are in some ways, your local businesses. So you kind of also have to cover it as a business story in addition to a technology and a technological revolution story. That seems a blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I mean, the way that we think about it is we don't cover businesses from the inside out in the way that some reporters in our sphere do, and we think more about the people who are experiencing the things that these businesses make, or layoffs because they work at these companies. Like, we try to stay on the ground with them in that 3-foot zone.
Yeah, that's an example
the
of
3-foot zone. The 3-foot zone.
Yeah, where just understanding specifically what's happening with this startup for the sake of understanding that startup, like, that's outside the 3-foot zone. That's a question that interests the investors in that company, but may not be generally as interesting to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So we all agree we don't have to do the business stories of these
There are
companies.
people
Great.
to do that.
Done. Yeah. Settled. That is true. It's well covered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for taking the time.
Oh, are you kidding me? We would have stayed on the line for like 4 hours with you. I think I told whoever set this up, I was like, they only want an hour?
Well, we're not going to let you go.
We're not letting
yet.
you go, but we are done with the serious part
we're
of this
going to
conversation.
come right back for the end game.
I was promised a game.
There
I
is
forgot.
going
this
to be a
is very
game.
exciting.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is some real candy at the end of this.
Soundside brings you beyond the headlines with news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Libby Dankman. Every week I sit down with local journalists for Soundside's Front Page, where we give you a shortcut to understanding the latest news and cultural moments and how they affect us here in the Puget Sound region. It's all here on Soundside, on the radio or streaming Monday through Thursday at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW, on the KUOW app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, so we're back for the end game on Booming, and we've got Kenny and Alex from Planet Money here. And first, let me just fawn a little bit on how great you guys are at coming up with clear analogies to help explain what's going on. We talked about economic principles, but you also sometimes come up with great analogies.
Very strong analogy game.
And
I would normally take this compliment, but I know this is heading towards a game, so now I'm a little worried where this is going.
Yeah. So here's the game we have planned for you. We're going to give you an economic situation and ask you each to come up with a quick analogy. And you can compete against each other, and we'll see who has the better analogy.
Based on very subjective judging.
You realize
by
my analogies are normally, come from 3 hours sitting and staring at the wall in a coffee shop or my home. But
we should have a little timer. Should we give them,
Let's do it live.
I don't know, 30 seconds and we can shorten it in post?
And are we each giving an analogy for the same economic situation, or are we taking turns?
Maybe it could be cooperative.
I just enjoy that Kenny's been designing a board game for like a year, so he really wants these rules clear.
It sounded like Alex said bird game, but it is a board game.
Oh, I heard bird game, and I was excited.
I know. I want to make it clear. I was worried. I was worried that it might sound more exciting that way. It's a Sasquatch game.
Yeah.
Oh, well, so Pacific
Which
Northwest.
I know you all know about in the Northwest. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Sasquatch is from here.
You know where they don't know about Sasquatch? Europe, apparently. We almost had to change the name because it wasn't going to play in Europe. But luckily we didn't come up with the better names.
And I guess we'll just harshly grade each of these analogies and see.
Fair.
Yeah, maybe they get points.
Yeah. So we've got two examples for you to come up with.
Are similes
analogies.
and metaphors both acceptable? Both, I believe, are analogies. Correct? Yes.
I think so.
I forget my English stuff.
I think we'll allow it. You can see how fully formed our end games are by the time we hop on the mic here.
Yeah, they're pretty informal.
Yes, grade harshly. That's appropriate.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so here's the first situation for you to quickly develop an analogy for, which we will then grade. Okay. In Seattle, it's been, as we discussed, hard to build new housing in many parts of the city for a long time. But in neighborhoods where it can be built, we're seeing a lot of townhomes. And people say, those townhomes are really expensive. In fact, all the new housing I see is expensive. How can you tell me that building more housing is the solution when it only seems to be making my city a more expensive place to live? We know from research that adding more housing does keep prices from rising as quickly, but there's a lot of nuance. And I, personally, as a housing reporter, I'm always searching for a way to sort of explain this, what people perceive as kind of a paradox. And so, what do you think is a useful analogy to explain what's going on here?
Okay. May we ask two questions before we do our analogy?
Yes.
Are the new builds, in fact, more expensive than the median home cost?
Yes. Well, they're more expensive. The townhomes are probably about average for the median, pretty close to the median home cost. They're replacing houses where the land was very expensive, and people may have a memory of purchasing a house on that land a long time ago for a much smaller amount of money. But the value's all in the land now,
Okay. And so
I would say that townhomes are being built for the upper end of the middle class.
Okay. And Alex, you may I use the second question, or would you like to use it?
Please.
You guys can have as many questions as you want.
Okay. And then my second question is, generally speaking, has this helped on the other side of the housing spectrum? Has building higher end housing helped with the cost of lower end housing elsewhere in the city?
Well, we're also seeing subsidized low-income housing being built, but not at the scale that is needed to meet the demand.
But it has increased the overall supply, right? So we would imagine that has reduced the overall housing crisis by adding these units.
Okay.
I mean, everything we build reduces the overall crisis, but the demand here has exceeded our rate of increase of supply.
Okay. Right. Okay. All right, Alex, you ready? Where are you at? Where's your head at? What's the first noun that comes to mind? What world are you in?
Filtering.
Filtering, like
well,
carbon
because this
filters?
is to do the classic Planet Money move. Like there is a name that partially explains this, like filtering, which is sometimes referred to as like trickle down housing, which is also, but that's right.
Seems loaded. Trickle down housing seems loaded. You want to go filters? Do you think in Brita filters? Are you thinking?
Yeah,
it's like a Brita. I don't know how Brita
a little bit
filters
different
work,
because
though.
filtering is about how if you like something that's built as like a very expensive housing, like quote unquote luxury housing, over time as that building ages, it might become the more affordable housing in the future. Right, which is a little bit different maybe from what we're doing here, where it feels a little bit more
we're relieving pressure. We're relieving pressure is the world I'm in. So I'm thinking, I mean, I currently am just at the physical therapist a lot, so I'm thinking a lot about orthopedics, but I don't think that's the right place to go.
Yeah.
Where are we relieving pressure? I'm thinking, okay, balloons? Are you there? Not balloons. We got to pick a world.
I was thinking water, so I was going like adding like extra like reservoirs or something like that.
Okay, man,
I also had a thought of like whack-a-mole, which probably isn't right, but there is this element of like.
Let's go with whack-a-mole. Let's just stick with something. We got to pick something. All right.
Yeah.
So housing, Joshua, Monica, housing, it is a little bit like whack-a-mole, right, Alex?
Yes, because like if you don't build those nice, expensive apartments, the people who are moving into them would go elsewhere.
Now, yes. And if you think about the game Whack-A-Mole, you whack one of the moles, the titular moles, if you will, and it goes down, and that problem is solved temporarily, but another one crops up, right? But let me play it out for you this way. You may be seeing expensive housing, but that's just the game of Whack-A-Mole that's in front of you. Imagine if expanding housing is in fact making the Whack-A-Mole board even bigger. It's allowing more moles to have homes. And those we don't look at. And when we're not looking at those mole homes, those may be lower cost mole homes that they can live in and not be whacked. I've lost track of whether whacking the mole is good or not. But right, Alex? That sound right?
Yes. Yeah. I'm also a little unsure whether whacking the mole is helpful or not. But there is this way, though, where I think like what tricks people up is that you feel like, okay, if building new housing really makes everything more affordable, you build it and then the rents go down and the housing prices go down. But building housing is a game of whack-a-mole where you have to keep whacking the mole. You whack one mole, you're not done. You have to keep going. You have to build more housing because there are lots of people who want to come. It's not just the case that, we're like we've underbuilt in some places like Seattle for years and years, and it is going to take a while to make that back. It is a game of whack-a-mole. You do not whack one mole and call it quits and you're done.
Yeah.
Because it is a never fully solved problem, as is the game of whack-a-mole, right?
Yeah. Correct.
And as a person, I think it could. I like this analogy. I can see how it could benefit from some refinement over time.
Yeah.
One thing that really resonates with me as a person who, as I get older, have trouble multitasking is, I could only concentrate on one mole at a time. Like I see the one townhome on my street whose price has gone up. That's a very small sample size. When in fact, there may be a whole world of things happening outside that smaller sample size. And the aggregate average home price might be, just not going up quite as quickly across this whole vast field of moles. Yet I can only see that one in front of me.
Look, we think of Whack-A-Mole as a game at Chuck E. Cheese. And if that's the one you're focusing on, that is a high-end Whack-A-Mole game. And it's going to have certain characteristics. But remember, there are Whack-A-Moles at many kids' arcades. And people are doing better at those ones than maybe you are at Steve & Buster's. And so just consider the multiplicity of Whack-A-Mole.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow. All right.
How many stars out of
Done.
5 do we give this analogy?
I mean, I'd give it a 8 for effort and maybe
8 out of 5.
6.
Thank you, Joshua.
Wait. I thought we were in 10. Okay.
Amazing.
I'll give it
a crushed.
I'll give
you
it
really
a.
was serious about the
I'll give it
multitasking thing.
a 4 for effort and a 3 for effectiveness.
For execution. Okay. Yeah. I support that.
That's about where we.
Solid effort. A solid effort.
Often land higher on effort than execution. It's the Planet Money model.
I think revisiting the balloon, if we were to go through edits on this, might be worthy. But no, I've got to move on. I have to move on to my example.
There was. You think there was juice in the balloon?
I think there was juice in the balloon.
I think Kenny's relieving pressure in one area. That you follow that, and we will get the perfect housing metaphor analogy.
So. Okay. So for my example, it comes from an episode of Booming that we were working on about how businesses that serve the middle class are disappearing. And Joshua and I were having a conversation about this, and I was talking about diners. There are a lot less diners today than there were in the middle class heyday of the 60s and 70s. My favorite diner closed in Seattle. And Joshua said, well, that doesn't feel true to me because at my favorite diners, when I go on a Saturday morning, they all have lines out the door, so they seem like they're doing great. So how
is he going to hipster diners though? I just want to.
Joshua,
clarifying questions, Joshua. What kind of diners are you going to?
I guess I'm thinking of the Dish, which is a very small space, and it is very, very cute. So it could have some Instagram juju going on there.
Okay.
But the phenomenon here is, like, how do you explain the mismatch in perception? The diners I see are doing well, and the overall economic reality. Diners that serve this shrinking middle class are closing down largely. Many of them are.
Wait, is that true? Who is right here? Is my critical question.
Well, I think what we're concluding is that there is heavy demand on Saturday mornings for fewer diners.
Okay. I might have something here.
Okay.
All right.
Yep. Kenny, go.
Alex, hear me out. I'm going to call this the standing too close to the television effect. Okay? Something I warn my children about all the time. If you're standing very close to the television, you are getting a blurry, questionable picture of what is intended for you to see. Look, we're all flies to the light at the end of the day. We want to stand close to the television, and we want to see what is right in front of us, and it is human nature to do that. But may I implore you, so that your eyes do not go bad, please step back and see the whole picture. Just step back from the television, see the whole picture, and consider that it is part of a much larger story. And may I even say, step back even further and see that the television is within a room and that there is even more context. And if you step outside of the house, there's even more context. The house is part of a community. It's all contextual. And we just need to move away from the television. And Joshua needs to move away from that one diner in his neighborhood and get out of the house. That's the too close to the television analogy.
Yeah.
That's
Alex,
very
what do you think?
nice.
Yeah, I'm in favor. And yeah, this is this kind of like exposure effect, right? Where it's one of those biases where the thing that we hear about or experience, we assume is very, very common, even though it might
the
not
availability
be. It might just be
bias, I believe it is called.
Thank
yes.
you. Yeah. And so I think I like Kenny's point of this being standing too close. So
it's not good for us.
Your sample size
it's not good
is
for
too
us,
small.
Joshua.
There are downsides. It's not healthy. You need a broader perspective.
I actually don't know
endorse
if that's
the too
true,
close
to
the
be
TV
honest.
effect.
Like, my mom told me it was bad for me, but I don't know. Maybe it's fine. But I still think you shouldn't do it. Like, you
It's
should
bad
go
for you
get
in a
more
bigger
information.
sense.
Correct. That's right.
Because you're missing things.
Yeah.
You're missing so much.
Right. That one is really, I think that's a 5-star.
Yeah, I think
Especially
so.
on the spot. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And Alex and Kenny, I would say you have won the end game.
Yeah.
I appreciate
much.
winning a game where there's no one who lost.
That is nice. We can
too.
all go home winners.
I mean, we lost in the last round, and all of your, I would
We
argue,
beat
all
our
of your
previous
listeners
round.
lost during that round too.
We had to
Whatever
take
that
our
whack-a-mole
listeners
was.
through the swamps of despair so that they could, feel
Classic
great
journey.
in the final battle there.
I want you
Hero's
both
journey,
to know
that's
that I'm a serious, important person with a lot going on. So I'm definitely not going to spend approximately 12 hours next week trying to perfect the whack-a-mole metaphor and prove that it deserved at least 4 stars.
wow. Okay. Well,
This
you
is
know
where,
what?
This
If
is where we talk about the
I
sunk cost fallacy. Give it up, man. It's a lost cause.
if I see you at your Seattle event, April 13th, I will give you the
April 13th.
chance to reprise the whack-a-mole analogy and convince me it deserves 4 stars.
Yes, these are both true things that Kenny and I will be in Seattle on April 13th with a great housing economist, Daryl Fairweather, herself an author of economics book.
We can run the analogy past Daryl.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It'll both be embarrassing,
We'll
a
do
little
that.
embarrassing, but also fantastic if Daryl has
Okay.
it just pulls out a much better
All right.
analogy.
What we will try to remember to do is before we interview Daryl, we'll say how many booming listeners are here. And if there are enough, then we will then run
reprise
this
the
analogy
game.
past. Now, I will say, if I can tease the event, so this is not your typical book tour event. Like, Alex will be there. We'll talk about the book a little bit, but there's going to be like a live, only available on stage Planet Money episode that we're going to perform. The famous Planet Money TikTok guy, one of the famous Planet Money TikTok guys, Jack Corbett, is going to be there doing like explaining a little bit about his process, but doing like live on-screen animations or whatever stuff. And I'm going to present, subject to change, but I believe this is what we're going to do. I'm going to present something that I'm calling Planet Money Minus. We always tell people to join Planet Money Plus, which is a subscription service. Planet Money Minus is stuff that we've all agreed to never play for anyone ever again after making it until now. These are experiments gone awry, things that started as great ideas that were ultimately terrible ideas, but I think we're going to air some of those horrible ideas in Seattle.
I love it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And Booming will have
You
a
don't
table
get to
at
hear
the
him unless
event,
you come.
too, so you can come say hi and see this mashup in person.
Yeah.
We would love that.
Please do. Yeah.
Great. Well, Kenny, Alex, thank you so much for coming on Booming. This was really fun.
Thank you. We're happy
you
anytime.
so much.
Genuinely.
Yeah.
That was Kenny Malone, host of the Planet Money podcast, and Alex Miyasi, business reporter and author of the new Planet Money book. It's called Planet Money, A Guide to the Economic Forces That Shape Your Life.
And if you're in the Seattle area and you want to meet Kenny Malone and Alex Miyasi in person, they will be at Town Hall on Monday, April 13th. You can grab your tickets at the link in our show notes. And Booming will have a table there too, so come say hi.
Yeah. If you have an idea about a story that you want us to look into, email us at booming@kuow.org, or you can leave us a voicemail at 206-221-7158.
And this show is part of KUOW, a public radio station, which means we are donation-based. If you would like to donate and help Booming keep going, go to kuow.org/booming. And thank you.
Our producers are Lucy Suchek and Alec Cowan. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Joshua McNichols.
I'm Monica Nicholsberg, and we'll catch you next time.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
We all remember this song. It made it all seem so simple, and turns out it's not. Who writes, influences, and kills bills? It gets messy. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Dankman. On Sound Politics, we tell that story, the inside track on how policy gets made in this Washington and the other one, and how it impacts you.
Listen now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.